President Biden in Mexico for his Three Amigos summit after taking heat over his sanitized trip to the border. The big guy's meeting with Mexico's president and Canada's prime minister. Biden trying to work with Mexico on stopping the flow of deadly fentanyl that's poisoning thousands of Americans. And he's boasting about progress at the border, but couldn't even get some basic facts right.
I'm also going to discuss our shared security, including our joint action to address the plague of fentanyl, which has killed 100,000 Americans so far, and how we can tackle irregular migration, which I think we're well on our way to doing.
Biden understating the number of fentanyl deaths by about 100,000. And remember the scathing letter he got from Texas Governor Greg Abbott? Turns out Biden didn't even care enough to read it.
The president's well aware of Governor Abbott's concerns and what the essential thrust was in that letter, which obviously are in keeping with the governor's concerns. And clearly they don't have the same view here with respect to how to handle the issue at the border.
All right. So didn't read the letter and couldn't even read his own letter that he was trying to get out there at that meeting.
I think that there was I always try to look at things with a view of what's the good news here, what's the silver lining, and
it's disgusting.
Yeah, I really have been a disappointment to everybody. But in regards to this Three Amigos summit, you think, okay, well, maybe now something can get done. He's got the president has the midterm behind him. He's got the re-election in front of him. Maybe he'll want to really address this. And the fact that they could be so dismissive of a governor of a state who actually is on the front lines dealing with this, doing with state money, with his state taxpayer money, having to do what the federal government should be doing. And he writes a letter to the president. I understand it's a little bit of a prop, right? But the message in there was, here, sir, I need you to hear me. I want you. I think that is actually pretty rude. Oh. To take the letter and then to have the spokesperson say, yeah, he didn't read it. He basically knows what's in it. No, actually, maybe take a moment to read it. And sometimes I think about, why do you even want to run for office? Why do you want to be in leadership? Partly you want to be in leadership because you want to solve problems. Solving problems means admitting there's a problem, understanding the problem. And now that they've done the check-the-box exercise at the border, I think Jessica yesterday said, well, the Republicans are moving the goalpost. They said, why don't you go to the border? And now we're saying, well, yeah, but, okay, we know that the border visit was sanitized. He didn't even talk to the congressman from the area who's a Republican, who's a pretty reasonable guy. He's, like, willing to work with the administration on things. He's the only Republican that voted against the House Republican Rules package, Tony Gonzalez. And you just have a feeling that nothing is going to change from this visit. I did think one thing that the president did was good. I would have maybe liked to see it a little bit more. Yesterday, the president of Mexico had the nerve to say that the United States has done nothing for Latin America and South America since JFK. And thankfully, President Biden did push back on that because American taxpayers have done a lot. One of the big problems is when you're talking about root causes, no one in Mexico or Latin America tends to have a mirror, I guess, because the root causes are staring at them right in the face.
Not the mirror you use.
Yeah. And you give Mexico the money, and then the money goes poof, and all of a sudden the cartels have half of it.
Poof it is. You know, Biden wants the job. He doesn't want the work. It's always been about the perks, the benefits, and the status. The aviator glasses, the bomber jacket, patting people on the back. He's the eternal consultant that gets the 6 or 7 figures but never does any work. And we also know why Joe finally brought up fentanyl. It's because Hunter finally ran out. Gutfeld classic. And but the question is, who is really more corrupt? Who's really a more selfish politician? The guy who wanted to build a wall at the border, or the one who wants to build a wall around his beach house? At least Trump was getting Mexicans to pay for it, where Biden will just get Mexicans to build it, but we're going to pay for it. And the reason he's building the wall isn't even for security. It's to keep Joe from wandering off into traffic.
You are on fire today. Gutfeld classic.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on this? I mean, it hasn't been a smooth trip. It has not been a smooth trip.
I'm not as bothered by him not reading Abbott's letter. What I'm probably a little more bothered by, I would have thought at this summit, we've laid out elements for what a plan could look like. Fentanyl, the trafficking of drugs in humans, be it sex trafficking, be it gangs coming across. That's what I want answers to, and I would have thought. And maybe there's a lot going on that we're not seeing. I, too, like Dana, I'm glad there was pushback. I'm one who has called for some more hemispheric investment, but I thought the way the president, I think it was the Mexican president, presented, not only was not factual, but it certainly wasn't partner-like in what he was saying, although I think I understand the thrust of what he was trying to get out, but I'm glad our president responded as he did. We need a wall. Democrats build it. Republicans agree to what we have to do on the other side as it relates to transparency around how you get the citizenship. Give us certainty for students, for workers, those who've spent 5, 10, 15, 20 years in America and are looking to become citizens. Let's figure out some negotiation here. But it has to start with I think, two people at the top, President Biden, and I think right below him, Speaker McCarthy. They are in the majority. The two of them need to push one another. If Republicans in the House put forward, I think, a sound, reasonable, and forceful immigration and border plan, you're going to force the president, and you'll have Democrats like me saying we have to counter. And I think you'll have a lot more Democrats, including the ones who were with the president yesterday at the border.
I don't know if I see immigration reform coming out of this Congress and this presidency.
I'm not so sure it would, but I want to talk about a couple of things. Number one, do you recall that the president gave Kamala Harris the job of being the border czar and finding the root causes? Now, he could have fine-tuned it and just said, can I talk to someone coming across the border? I want to know what the root causes are, why these people are coming across. He didn't speak to any of the people who are crossing the border. He could have found out and gotten rid of that whole issue right off the bat. That's number one. Number two, didn't take any Republicans, whether it's Gonzalez or anyone else. What is the problem with Mr. Unity bringing people who are Republicans with him from that area to look at the border? What's he afraid of? They're going to say something? And the most rude, condescending thing he did, there is a man, Governor Abbott, in a wheelchair, handing up a letter, and the president and Kirby are saying, we're well aware of their concerns. We don't have to read it. He's the president. He has to read that letter. This man is the chief executive of the state of Texas. And, you know, this trip is supposedly about trade and energy and all this stuff. The most important thing is national security. And nobody has a plan for the entrance of all of these drugs. He doesn't even know how many drugs are coming in. He didn't even mention the word fentanyl for, I think, a year and a half. Didn't even come off of Biden's lips. But the truth is that with all of these gotaways, 78,000 in like the last couple of months, we don't know who's on a terrorist list. We don't know who's part of the cartels. We don't know who's building the artery that they're using to funnel all these drugs through. And Mexico is corrupt. I'm sorry. The Mexican government is corrupt. They're not going to fight the cartels. And yet we think we're going to have some real agreement with them to fight the cartels. No, they're going to destroy us.
All right. And the three amigos are supposed to be taking questions any moment. We'll have that for you guys.
You don't think it's right for the Republicans to, I just want to make sure, you said you didn't think it was right for
I
the
don't think the
Republicans
Senate under Schumer is going to take it up.
So does that mean McCarthy shouldn't even propose
They'll
something?
put it out, and it'll die in the Senate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.